Throughout our lives, we have been taught many things about history that seem to be fairly normal, and we never question those things which are taught to us. There are, however, some things that our history teachers got wrong, or they were actually taught to mislead people from the truth. Check out these 10 historical facts they don't want you to know. The British were never going to win the Revolutionary War. If you read any stories or see any movies that have anything to do with the American Revolution, you would think that the British had a vast army and the Americans were heavily outnumbered. However, it turns out that the tables were actually turned, and it was the British that were the ones who were heavily outmanned and outgunned. At the start of the war, the British Army was already undermanned and overextended in protecting the vast empire's other possessions. Against a force of less than 40,000 British soldiers stood 250,000 to 375,000 colonials who supported the revolution. Britain's leaders made a miscalculation when they assumed that resistance from the colonies, as the Earl of Dartmouth predicted, could not be very formidable. And well, we all know what happened, as the United States is not under British rule. Christopher Columbus discovered America. Here is a big one that everyone was seemingly taught in school. However, it turns out that this was just a myth. The belief that Christopher Columbus discovered America is apparently widespread. In a 2005 survey from the University of Michigan, 85% of Americans believe that Columbus discovered the continent, while only 2% of respondents were able to correctly answer that Columbus couldn't have possibly discovered America because Native Americans already lived here. Columbus is historically significant because in his 1492 voyage to the Americas, he brought diseases that killed a massive portion of the Native American population. Some suggest as much as 90%. Perhaps that is the reason the myth is still told instead of the truth. Sir Isaac Newton discovered gravity when an apple fell on his head. This version of the story is seemingly repeated time and time again. However, it's just a story cleverly rewritten to possibly make it more interesting. So therefore, Newton's apple legend isn't true, but like many urban legends, it's an embellished version of something that actually happened. An apple didn't fall on Newton's head, but Newton did start theorizing about gravity when he saw an apple falling from a tree and started thinking about it. In fact, he wrote about the actual experience in his memoir where he recalled going outside after dinner with a friend. We went into the garden and drank tea under the shade of some apple trees, only he and myself. Amidst other discourse, he told me he was just in the same situation as when formerly the notion of gravitation came into his mind. Why should that apple always descend perpendicularly to the ground? Thought he to himself. Occasioned by the fall of an apple, as he sat in a contemplative mood, why should it not go sideways or upwards, but constantly to the Earth's center? Assuredly, the reason is that the Earth draws it. Holy Grail. In Staffordshire, England, there is a sculpture that has invited the wits and intellect of many intellectuals in an attempt to decode an inscription reading DOUOSVAVVM. Although the Shepherd's Monument was constructed back in the 18th century, the letters found therein were never solved, even 250 years after it was completed. The Shugborough inscription is a sequence of letters, OUOSVAVV, between the letters DM, carved on the 18th century Shepherd's Monument in the grounds of Shugborough Hall in Staffordshire, England, below a mirror image of Nicholas Poussin's painting The Shepherds of Arcadia. It has never been satisfactorily explained and has been called one of the world's top uncracked cipher texts. Speculation has since then grown that the inscription may encode secrets related to the Priory of Sion, or the location of the Holy Grail. Speaking of the Holy Grail, some believe the 2,000-year-old vessel is in a church in Lyon in northern Spain. Hitler feared the French and admired the British. This will likely be something that no one knows. However, everyone knows that Hitler was no peacenik, but he actually exhibited a very healthy fear of the Anglo-French alliance. In fact, during the reoccupation of the Rhine, Hitler famously ordered his generals to sound a retreat at the faintest sign of French resistance. Hitler also admired the British for their ability to maintain such a large empire. He made repeated peace overtures to the British even in the course of war. The Führer showed genuine surprise at the two nations' declaration of war after Germany invaded Poland. After the declaration, he reportedly reproached his foreign minister and asked, "What now?" Alas, the Allies were too slow to move. Hitler got over his initial shock and escalated his efforts. The US provoked Japan into war. When speaking about war, there are many things that some countries would rather not have you know. And some conspiracy theorists have brought up the question, did the US know that Japan was going to attack Pearl Harbor? And then there is the notion of why Japan would start a war with a country that would crush them. There are two different stories to consider. It is said that the FBI ignored compelling evidence on the attack on Pearl Harbor. The legendary director of the FBI for over 50 years, J. Edgar Hoover, didn't trust the Serbian double agent Dusan Popov, who was apparently a gambling, lustful drunk. However, if some sources are to be believed, President Roosevelt's administration started it all. FDR, to secure public favor for a war against Germany, imposed severe embargoes and sanctions that crippled Japan's economy, leaving the Japanese no choice but to attack the US. What makes this conspiracy plausible is the existence of the McCollum Memo. The memo, written in 1940 by Naval Intelligence Officer Arthur McCollum, recommended 8 ways for the US to provoke Japan into war. While no compelling evidence exists that the memo ever reached FDR, McCollum's 2 superiors who reviewed the memo did serve as FDR's close aides. The atomic bombings were unnecessary. It has been said that there was a plan to invade Japan during World War II, and this plan actually almost went into effect. However, this isn't the story you will likely hear. The invasion would have resulted in millions of American and Japanese casualties, and it could be rationalized that the atomic bombs that were dropped instead saved all those American lives. But there is more to this story that it would seem the leaders of that time didn't want anyone to know. A month before Germany surrendered, Japan was already sending a series of secret messages to the Allies, signifying its intent to surrender, with the condition that the Emperor remain untouched. The Allies rejected the condition, and the US went ahead and dropped the bomb. In a bitter act of irony, they did end up letting the Emperor keep his place among the Japanese when the war ended. So why use the atomic bomb? Apparently, the USA wanted to instill fear in the Soviets and contain the growth of communism. Instead, the Soviet Union successfully detonated their own bomb just 4 years after the war. Benjamin Franklin, the Kite, and the Thunderstorm. Another great American hero to whom many seem to attribute mutant superpowers is Ben Franklin, the scientist and statesman whose inventions included bifocal spectacles, the urinary catheter, and the signing of the Declaration of Independence, which led to freedom. He was particularly interested in electricity and faced with intense skepticism from his colleagues about his theory that lightning is electricity. Legend has it that he conducted an experiment to prove them wrong. Franklin, without a knowing wink, went out into a raging thunderstorm and released a kite with a lightning rod affixed to the top and a metal key attached to the string. The story goes that lightning struck the kite and the electricity passed down the string and into the key. When Franklin touched the key, it let off a spark of static electricity. It's certainly true that Franklin at least proposed the kite experiment. Less certain, however, is whether or not he ever actually got around to performing it, and some sources suggest he did not. The reality of Franklin's experiment is that it simply involved flying a kite into some clouds to collect a few harmless ions, in order to prove that the atmosphere carries a charge. It is through Franklin's discoveries that science was able to infer later on that lightning probably has something to do with electricity. Precambrian spheres. Over the last few decades, miners in South Africa have been digging up mysterious metal spheres, aka the Klerksdorp spheres. Origin unknown, these spheres measure approximately an inch or so in diameter, and some are etched with 3 parallel grooves running around the equator. 2 types of spheres have been found. One is composed of a solid bluish metal with flecks of white. The other is hollowed out and filled with a spongy white substance. The kicker is that the rock in which they were found is Precambrian and dated to 2.8 billion years old. Who made them and for what purpose is unknown. However, the Bible tells us that God created Adam and Eve just a few thousand years ago. According to science, man is a few million years old, and the oldest civilizations existed just tens of thousands of years ago. Could it be that the Bible and science are both wrong? Thanksgiving. The last one on our list is really going to make a lot of people think differently about the holiday that is celebrated in America and also in Canada, but under different historical instances. Apparently, the entire Thanksgiving story is a lie, which is as follows. Pilgrims on the Mayflower arrived at Plymouth Rock in 1620. Unprepared for the harsh winter, they were saved by the friendly natives who gave them food and taught them how to plant corn. The following autumn, on their first harvest in the New World, they had a feast to commemorate the hardships they had survived, and Pilgrim and Native Americans joined hands in celebration. Now, if you think about this for a moment, you might ask yourself, if the Pilgrims and Native Americans were friends, then what happened? We basically touched on this earlier, but we'll bring the truth to the front. The real story is a touch crueler, murderous, and genocidal. 3 years before the Pilgrims arrived, European fishermen and settlers had introduced a plague that had swept through the tribes of coastal New England and wiped out nearly 96% of the entire population. There were reportedly so many deceased that settlers would leave the towns rather than deal with them, only to introduce the bug to the next tribe they encountered. Even worse, the Pilgrims would steal food and tools from any Indians left alive who were too weak to fight back. Happy Thanksgiving! If you want to verify the facts in our videos, check out the Pastebin link in the description. We hope you enjoyed this video. Let us know which one of these historical facts impressed you the most. And if you liked our video and want to see more, click the subscribe link and you'll magically get notified each time we release a new one. We appreciate you and want to thank you for watching Interesting Facts.